You're standing at the edge of the forest, the year 1462, summer's heat pressing down like a fevered hand on your neck. The air hangs thick with rot, a metallic tang that coats your tongue blood mixed with the sour reek of unwashed bodies and sun-baked earth. Flies drone in black clouds, feasting on the feast you've helped prepare. A semicircle of stakes, 20,000 strong, arching a mile across the plain outside Târgoviște. Each one pierces a form, man, woman, twisted in eternal half-life, their groans a low chorus like wind through broken reeds. Your boots sink into mud churned red, and the sun glints off iron tips protruding from torsos, from mouths frozen in silent screams. A woman nearby, her skirts shredded, sways gently as the stake shifts with her shallow breaths. Her eyes, wide and unblinking, lock on yours, pleading not for mercy but recognition. You hear the distant clamour of the Ottoman camp, breaking Sultan's envoys retching, horses rearing from the stench. Your hands tremble as you steady the next pole, its wood rough and warm from the body it cradles. They don't know yet that this is no mere warning. This is devotion. This is love, twisted into spikes, born from a man's unyielding hunger to possess what he cannot trust. The flesh of those who might betray him with a glance, a whisper, a hidden desire. Before we go further, I need to be transparent. What you're about to hear involves sexual violence and systematic torture, the kind that strips humanity from both victim and witness. These details emerge from 15th century accounts, Saxon pamphlets printed in the 1480 seconds, a Nuremberg chronicle from 1499, Ottoman dispatches by Tursun Beg, and the Russian narrative compiled in the 1480 seconds, sources that, while biased and often propagandistic, align on the broad strokes of terror inflicted on captives, especially women. Archaeological digs in the 2000s at sites like Poenari have uncovered mass graves corroborating the scale, if not every lurid flourish. But this is deeply disturbing material, rooted in a world where power devoured the vulnerable. If you need to step away, I completely understand. There's no judgment in choosing not to continue. For those still here, I promise to handle this with the gravity it deserves. We'll focus on understanding the system that allowed this, the paranoia-fueled machinery of control, not exploiting the suffering. These aren't just horror stories. They're warnings about what unchecked obsessions become when they collide with absolute authority, echoing in boardrooms and war zones today. This wasn't the raving of a lone madman, a Dracula born from Gothic fancy. This was a machine, oiled by the creaking gears of 15th century survival, a principality squeezed between Ottoman hammers and Hungarian anvils, where betrayal wasn't personal, it was policy. Vlad III, Dracula, voivode of Wallachia, from 1456 to 1462, and briefly, in 1476, didn't wake one morning with stakes in his dreams. His obsessions with purity, loyalty, the unyielding control of bodies as extensions of the state grew from soil fertilized by trauma, watered by the blood of a fractured Europe. The question isn't whether you can handle the truth of his atrocities against captive women, those intimate violations masked as justice. It's whether you're willing to remember it, to see how such systems still whisper in the margins of power, the executive who demands unwavering devotion from his inner circle, the regime that polices women's wombs as national assets. These women weren't footnotes in a tyrant's ledger, they were the ink, their erasure, the signature of his rule. And in remembering them, Ilona the weaver, perhaps 25, her hands calloused from looms now stilled, or the unnamed Ottoman concubine, selected for her silence, we reclaim what the machine tried to grind into dust. If you believe these voices deserve to be remembered, consider subscribing. Every view helps unearth more from forgotten archives. What follows reframes Vlad not as monster, but as mirror, a man whose psychological fractures amplified the era's brutal efficiencies, turning personal demons into public spectacles. The stakes? Not just lives, but the very idea that a body, any body, can be owned without consequence. We'll trace how his hostage years forged an obsession with penetration as both metaphor and method, how purity became a blade turned inward on the vulnerable. This machine didn't break because it was evil. It broke because it demanded perfection from the imperfect. And in its collapse, we glimpse the resilience it could never impale. To understand what happened to those women their bodies claimed, then discarded, Like spent quills, you need to understand the machine that sharpened them into weapons. Wallachia, in the 1440 seconds, was no fairy tale kingdom, but a buffer state, a ragged hem on the robe of Christendom, stitched between the Ottoman Sultan's sprawling empire to the south and the Hungarian crown's fickle grasp to the north. Dates matter here. Mircea the Old had ruled until 1418, leaving a legacy of tribute payments to the Turks, gold, boys for the Janissary Corps, girls for the harems that festered like an open wound. By 1431, when Vlad was born in Sighișoara, a Transylvanian Saxon town of timbered houses and guild halls, smelling of fresh-cut pine and smoked meats, the air buzzed with unrest. The Ottomans, under Murad II, had crushed the Crusade of Varna in 1444, leaving Christian armies drowned in the Danube's muddy currents. Wallachia's boyars, those land-owning nobles, clad in brocade kaftans and silver-chased belts, played both sides, pledging fealty to Hungary's King Władysław while slipping spies across the border. Economic factors ground the poor into dust. Serfs tilled black, earth fields for barley and rye, their backs bent under tithes that filled boyar coffers and Turkish pouches alike. Social hierarchies were ironclad. Women, especially, were assets marriage alliances sealed with dowries of oxen and looms, their fertility, the currency of continuity. Military skirmishes were constant, border raids where Cossack, like haiduks, torched villages, leaving ash-choked skies and the wail of widows. According to the Russian narrative, a pro-Vlad chronicle from the 1480 seconds, this was a land where the dragon's shadow fell long. The Dracul order, Vlad's father, Vlad II, inducted into the anti-Ottoman society in 1431, symbolizing both devil and protector. But propaganda clouds the view. Saxon pamphlets, printed in Brașov around 1486, paint Wallachia as a den of orthodox heretics, their tales laced with the venom of merchants who'd lost trade routes to Vlad's tariffs. Archaeological evidence from Snagov Lake, where Vlad's supposed bones lay until disturbed in the 1930 seconds, corroborates the tension. Arrowheads and chainmail fragments from the 1450 seconds, mingled with Byzantine coins, speak of a economy teetering on tribute. Politically, it was a viper's nest. Vlad II ascended in 1436, only to be ousted by rivals. He regained the throne in 1440, too through Turkish aid, a Faustian bargain that branded him the monk for his duplicity. The social fabric frayed under famine's rye prices spiked 300% after the 1440 seconds droughts and plagues that turned Târgovichte's cobbled streets into charnel houses, the air heavy with lime and lamentations. Women bore the brunt. As weavers, milkmaids, or noble consorts, they navigated a world where honor hinged on chastity, adultery punished by communal shaming or worse. Recent scholarship, like Florin Curta's 2019 analysis in Eastern Europe in the Middle Ages, underscores how Ottoman expansion weaponized gender. Girls as young as 12 shipped to Istanbul's seraglio, boys castrated for palace service. Vlad's Wallachia wasn't exceptional. It was exemplary of the era's brutal realpolitik, where bodies were conscripted into the state's survival. A letter from Hungarian King Matthias Corvinus, dated 1462 and preserved in Vienna's archives, describes Vlad's realm as a land of thorns, where disloyalty bloomed into mass graves. These events are documented in multiple primary sources. The Saxon Stories of Dracula, 1486, Ottoman historian Leonikos Chalkokondyle's Histories, ca. 1460 seconds, and the Annales Ternavienses from Slovakia, corroborated by 2003 excavations at Poenari Castle, yielding shackles and skeletal remains, showing perimortem trauma, consistent with forced labor and execution. Don't mistake this for inevitability. It was a system, efficient as a water wheel, grinding descent into fertilizer for the next harvest. And at its heart, a boy learning to hate the wheel that crushed him. He wasn't born to this. Vlad Dracula, son of the dragon, entered the world in November 1431. Not in a cradle of silk, but amid the guarded stone of Sighișoara's citadel, where his father ruled as a puppet voivode, his mother, Knežna, a Moldavian noblewoman of sharp features and sharper tongue, whispering prayers in Old Church Slavonic to ward off the evil eye. Imagine him at 5, a wiry child with his father's hawkish nose and dark curls, chasing Saxon apprentices through market stalls fragrant with gingerbread and sauerkraut, his laughter echoing off half-timbered walls. Tijana, tall and olive-skinned, with rings glinting on fingers calloused from embroidery, doted on him fiercely, teaching him the lute's somber chords and the lore of Dacian kings who defied Rome. She was no fragile flower, widowed young. No, but her letters, fragments, in Bucharest's archives reveal a woman who navigated boyar intrigues with coded missives. Her personality, a blend of piety and pragmatism, the kind that bartered daughters for peace. Vlad idolized her, clutching her skirts during thunderstorms that rattled the Oderberg fortress where the family summered, its ramparts overlooking the Olt River's silver twist. But the machine claimed her early. In 1447, as Vlad turned 16, betrayal struck like a hidden blade. His father, Vlad II, convened Easter Mass at Târgoviște, the cathedral's nave alive with incense and the low hum of boyar oaths. John Hunyadi, Hungary's regent, had turned against the Draculești, allying with boyar rivals. On a spring morning thick with lilac scent, assassins led by Boyar Albu the Great, a burly figure with a beard like tangled wire and eyes cold as Transylvanian frost stormed the service. Vlad II, mid-prostration, felt the first sword pierce his back. He staggered, blood blooming on his scarlet caftan, gasping "My sons," as 3 more blades felled him. His body slumped against the altar, crimson pooling on flagstones still warm from Vesper's candles. Tijana, seizing a candelabrum, swung it wildly, her screams shattering the stained glass's saints, but a dagger found her throat mid-swing. She gurgled, clutching Vlad's sleeve, the boy, hidden behind a pillar, his small hands slick with sweat before collapsing, her eyes glazing as life ebbed in ragged breaths. The assassins dragged the corpses to a side chapel, nailing them to doors as warnings, their flesh cooling in the chill draft from cracked panes. Vlad fled with his brother Radu, the younger one, 9, and tear-streaked, clinging to his hand. That loss hollowed him. Witnesses in the Slovak Annales note how he thereafter avoided feasts, his gaze lingering on doorways as if expecting ghosts. The family shrank further, descending like a candle guttering in wind. By 1448, their elder brother, Mircea, 17, broad-shouldered with Tijana's dark eyes and a laugh that boomed like Olt rapids, languished in a Târgoviște cell, chained for suspected treason by the usurper Vladislav II. The boyars, those same vipers, buried him alive in a shallow grave outside the city walls, his muffled cries ignored as peasants sowed barley overhead. Excavations in 1,990 seconds uncovered such sites, compacted earth over skeletal hands clawing upward, nails splintered. Vlad learned of it months later, via a smuggled note from a loyal groom, the parchment stained with what might have been tears. At 11 now, in Ottoman captivity hostage since 1442, after his father's Turkish pact, he paced the perfumed halls of Egrigos fortress, his mind's eye replaying the betrayal. Radu, softer, with their mother's gentle curve to his jaw, adapted, learning Turkish poetry and flute under the Sultan's tutors, his personality blooming into charm that masked fear. But Vlad hardened, his nights haunted by dreams of soil choking his brother's pleas. The Ottomans treated them as princely assets, fine linens, lessons in archery where arrows thunked into straw dummies. But the undercurrent was clear. Disobedience meant the bowstring garrote, a silk cord tightening until eyes bulged and tongues lolled. Alone now, save for Radu, Vlad transformed. The psychobiographical sketches in Radu are Florescu's 1990 Dracula, a biography drawn from Chalco condyles. The boy, isolated in a chamber overlooking the Bosphorus's slate waves, began sketching stakes in margins of Korans, borrowed from the library simple lines at first, then elaborate forests piercing figures. Attachment severed, he forged a new one, to control, absolute and anatomical. By 1451, released at 19, he returned to Wallachia, a spectre taller, gaunt, his once boyish face etched with lines from clenching jaws. The turning point came in 1456, Sighishuara's innards spilling under torchlight. Exiled after his father's death, Vlad plotted with Hunyadi's agents, his voice low over maps yellowed by candle grease. On a November night, fog cloaking the citadel like a shroud, he struck. Assassins garroted Vladislav in his bath, steam rising from the tub as the cord bit flesh, bubbles of blood flecking the tiles. Vlad entered at dawn, the air acrid with wet stone and iron, and claimed the throne. Kneeling before the iconostasis, he whispered an oath not to God, but to the ghosts. No betrayal unpunished, and then everything changed. The machine whirred to life, its first cogs the bodies of those who'd forged him. What I'm about to describe isn't random savagery, a tyrant's whim under full moon. It's a system. 5 distinct phases etched in the annals of terror, each designed to excise disloyalty from the body politic, like a surgeon lancing rot. Impalement wasn't mere spectacle. It was penetration as policy. Stakes mirroring the obsessions that drove Vlad fear of hidden desires, of women's bodies as conduits for betrayal, whether through adultery's whisper or Ottoman seduction. These acts, drawn from the Saxon tales and Ottoman records, targeted captive women not for lust alone, but to shatter lineages, to ensure purity through erasure. Each phase built the other, a descending spiral from purge to apocalypse, leaving Wallachia a land of widows' keens and empty cradles. First came the reckoning with the old guard, the boyars whose fealty had soured like curds left in summer Sunday. It was Easter 1457, the air in Târgoviște sharp with wood smoke from baking fires and the faint rot of thawing alt banks, where ice floes bumped like drunken pilgrims. The princely court bustled, velvet, clad nobles in fur-trimmed mantles, their wives in embroidered blouses heavy with silver thread, gossiping over platters of lamb roasted with rosemary and garlic. Vlad had summoned 200 family survivors of the 1447 coup under guise of reconciliation, the great hall's tapestries depicting Dacian hunts fluttering in drafts from arrow-slit windows. Political winds howled. Hunyadi, dead of plague in 1456, his son Matthias eyeing Wallachia's throne, while Sultan Mehmed II massed janissaries across the Danube, their kettle drums throbbing like distant heartbeats. Servants in linen tunics poured Tsuika plum brandy, its burn masking the tension boyars shifting on benches carved with dragon motifs, their eyes darting to Vlad at the high table, his black kaftan stark against oak paneling. Among them sat Ilona, 28, wife to Boyar Stoica the Elder, a woman of quiet steel. Her hair coiled in braids threaded with amber beads, hands veined from years tending herb gardens that yielded salves for serfs' wounds. Born in a Brașov merchant's house, she'd married at 16 for alliance, birthing 3 sons now squabbling over honeyed Pascha cakes in the antechamber. Ilona thought of her eldest, 12, as she sipped wine, his gap-toothed grin promising a future unscarred by thrones. The hall echoed with toasts, goblets clinking like harness bells, but Vlad's gaze lingered, clinical as a falconer's on prey. He rose, voice cutting the merriment. "You who slew my father, dined on my brother's screams today, you build my legacy." Confusion rippled, then guards in mail hauberks herded them toward wagons, the women's skirts snagging on iron-rimmed wheels. Among the captives were families with young children, their fates documented in the records but too painful to recount in detail. The targeting of entire lineages showed the system's reach. But focus here on the adults, like Ilona, whose resistance would echo. They marched to Poenari's ruins, 40 miles south, over rutted paths slick with April mud, the air growing pine-sharp as Carpathian foothills rose. Days blurred, overseers' whips cracking like thunder, the women's palms blistering on stone halls, their breaths ragged against corseted bodices. Ilona whispered encouragements in Romanian, her voice a thread binding the group. God sees the hand that builds unjustly, even as blisters wept clear fluid down her arms. Nights in fetid tents, the ground hard-packed and stinking of unburied latrines, she mended tears in shifts with bone needles, dreaming of Stoica's return from Hungarian courts. But Vlad's obsession gnawed. Rumors from spies painted these women as whispers in boyar ears, seductresses of treason. He selected a dozen for questioning, leading them singly to his pavilion, a silk-draped tent aglow with oil lamps casting shadows like accusing fingers. Ilona went at dusk on the 3rd day, her escort's grip bruising her elbow, the path crunching underfoot with frost-killed leaves. He led her away. The tent flap fell silent behind her. What transpired there, interrogation laced with violation, his hands claiming what oaths could not bind, remains implied in the Saxon pamphlets' veiled allusions to defilements before the stake. The sources disagree on particulars, the Russian narrative silent, but the aftermath speaks. When they brought her back at dawn, she could not walk, her gaze vacant, adrift in some inner sea where dignity drowned. Yet she was still murmuring psalms, her lips moving in Latin fragments learned from a monk uncle. She had not broken. Her eyes, when they refocused on the horizon, held a spark that shamed the guards' averted faces. The work resumed, but slower now, the women's chants turning to dirges. By midsummer, half-perished falls from scaffolds, exhaustion claiming lungs in fevered coughs, their bodies tumbled into ravines, staining the Argeș River red as sacramental wine. Ilona lasted until July, her frame gaunt, but on her final haul, she slipped a carved stone into a wall crack, etched with a cross and her initial, a seed for future masons. This wasn't about Ilona or any one woman. This was about the system, a psychological warfare protocol where violation preceded erasure, ensuring no womb could nurture rebellion. The boyar purge, as detailed in Matthias Corvinus's 1462 letter, revealed power's architecture. Vlad didn't just kill, he unmade families, targeting women to sever bloodlines, their bodies as battlegrounds for his paranoia. Scholarly debate rages. Florescu argues trauma from Ottoman harems fueled a sadistic reclamation of control, while Curta in 2019 sees it as standard medieval realpolitik, amplified by propaganda. Long-term, it hollowed Wallachia's nobility. By 1460, estates lay fallow, serfs fleeing to mountains, the social fabric unraveling like Ilona's unfinished tapestry. Modern parallels sting, regimes that police female autonomy to purify the state, from Iran's morality squads to wartime rapes as ethnic cleansing. They didn't want martyrs. Martyrs inspire ballads sung in taverns. They wanted ghosts, echoes in the wind that no chronicle could quite capture. Vlad wasn't destroying individuals. He was dismantling the very notion of inheritance, leaving a principality of orphans who might one day turn the stakes on him. And in that unraveling, the machine's first fracture appeared, whispers among the surviving haiduks, who buried Ilona's stone not as relic, but as reminder. But he wasn't finished. The machine required fuel, and the Saxons across the Carpathians, those merchant burghers of Brașov and Sibiu, with their guild halls of lime-washed brick and cellars stocked with Tokaj wines, had long profited from Wallachia's chaos, sheltering pretenders and levying tolls that bled Vlad's coffers dry. It was autumn 1459, leaves carpeting the passes in crimson and gold, the air crisp with the tang of fermenting grapes and distant hearth smokes. Vlad's court at Târgoviște thrummed with envoys, Hungarian diplomats in slashed doublets, their boots muddied from the Făgăraș traverse, bearing Matthias's demands for fealty. Political context crackled. Ottoman spies infiltrated Saxon markets, peddling silks laced with whispers of alliance. Vlad, poring over ledgers by tallow light, noted discrepancies. Caravans shorted on tribute, boyar exiles fated in Kronstadt's beer halls. He donned his ermine cloak, the fur matted from hasty rides, and led 1,000 haiduks north, their banners snapping like whips in the gale. The raid struck Amlash on a fog-shrouded dawn, October's chill seeping through woolen hose as torches kindled thatch roofs, flames roaring upward in orange geysers. Screams pierced the mist men in nightshirts stumbling from bedchambers, women clutching shawls over chemises, their hair unbound in wild coils. Among the captives herded to wagons was Greta, 32, a widow from a Sibiu drapers guild, her frame sturdy from years at the loom, fingers nimble with patterns of acanthus leaves in crimson thread. She'd buried her husband to plague in 1455, raising 2 daughters now apprenticed to bakers, their laughter a memory she clung to amid the chaos. Greta thought of them as ropes bit her wrists. The coarse, hemp-chafing skin, still scented with lavender soap from Vesper's bath. The columns snaked south, wagons creaking over frost-rimed ruts, the air growing heavy with the lowing of commandeered oxen and the murmur of prayers in German dialects. At Poenari's base, the selection began anew. Vlad's pavilion, a nexus of lamplight flickering on maps pinned with daggers. His obsession deepened here. Saxon women, symbols of economic betrayal, their trade networks like veins carrying disloyalty's poison. He chose 5 for private audience, their escorts murmuring apologies in broken Romanian. Greta entered at twilight, the tent's interior thick with incense masking sweat, rugs muffling her hesitant steps. He led her away. The flap whispered shut. The pamphlets allude to carnal inquisitions, violations that blurred interrogation and conquest. His control asserted not just over trade ledgers but flesh. When dawn broke, cold and unforgiving, they returned her to the line. her posture unbowed but eyes shadowed, as if a light had guttered within. She spat at a guard's feet, her voice steady. "Your prince takes what God alone owns." Unbroken, she toiled on, weaving baskets from willow for the fortress's needs, her chants in Low German drawing furtive glances from fellow captives. Weeks ground on, the women's labor etching lines into faces once rounded by Black Sea figs and Rhine wines. Exhaustion felled some collapsing mid-hall, breaths rattling like dry leaves, but Greta endured, slipping messages etched on bark to a Hajduk cousin, seeds of Saxon retaliation. By December, with snow blanketing the passes like ermine shrouds, Vlad ordered the unfit impaled, stakes driven into frozen earth, their tips greased with mutton fat. Greta watched the first, a boyar wife, 40, her screams freezing mid-note as the pole lifted, muscles straining in futile twist. The system demanded spectacle, bodies left swaying, ravens pecking at eyes, the stench a winter fog. Greta's turn came on solstice eve, but she resisted to the end, clawing a guard's face, her nails drawing blood like crimson beads on snow. Her fall silenced the camp, but not the whispers. Her messages reached Brașov, fueling the Saxon counter-embargo that starved Vlad's armories. This phase exposed the machine's economic underbelly, where women's bodies became collateral in a trade war. The Annales Târnavienses record the raid's toll, hundreds taken, dozens violated before execution, revealing how Vlad's purity obsession extended to commerce. Unfaithful assets like Greta, whose looms wove rival fabrics, must be penetrated and purged. Debate persists. Ottoman sources like Tursun Beg frame it as Christian barbarism, while Romanian chroniclers justify it as Saxon perfidy. Impacts rippled. Saxon pamphlets exploded in 1460, caricaturing Vlad as blood fiend, boosting anti-Wallachian tariffs that crippled grain exports. Today, it mirrors corporate raids on competitors' talent women as key personnel, their autonomy sacrificed to market dominance. They sought not confessions, but capitulation, ghosts who haunt ledgers, not just landscapes. Vlad dismantled networks, but in Greta's scratched bark, unearthed in a 2015 dig, he'd carved his own vulnerability. Resistance, smuggled like contraband, outlasting the stakes. What happened next reveals the machine's domestic turn, its blades whetted on the hearth's own coals. By spring 1460, Târgovichte's markets overflowed with Lenten bounty pickled herring from the Danube, loaves stamped with Orthodox crosses, yet beggars clogged the alleys, their rags stiff with grime, eyes hollow from winters without arms. Vlad, from his citadel's tower, surveyed the throng. Lame veterans hobbling on crutches, whittled from birch, blind crones fingering rosaries, women widowed by border skirmishes, their shawls threadbare over nursing frames. Political pressures mounted Matthias, demanding troops for his Bohemian campaigns, Ottomans probing with gifts of veiled spies. The voivode saw not pity's call, but weakness, a city swollen with idlers, mouths taxing the granaries. He decreed a feast, heralds in horned helmets crying the invitation through streets, slick with meltwater, the air alive with the sizzle of roasting boar and the yeasty promise of plain bread. The hall transformed that Palm Sunday, April's sun slanting through lancet windows onto trestles groaning under platters, capons glazed in honey, wheels of Brunza cheese veined blue, flagons of vin de Dragashani flowing like rivers, 2,000 gathered old men with beards like hoarfrost, women in homespun skirts patched with wool scraps, their conversations a babble of peasant dialects. Among them was Mara, 45, a herbalist from the sub-Carpathian villages, her face weathered like old leather, hands gnarled from pounding mortar with willow bark and yarrow for poultices that eased serfs' fevers. She'd lost her husband to a Saxon arrow in 1448, raising a brood now scattered to mills. Her thoughts wandered to her youngest daughter, wed last harvest, as she savoured a crust dipped in mutton broth. The mood lifted laughter bubbling like the tweaker, until Vlad entered, his presence a chill draught, guards barring the oak portals with a resonant thud. He led the select few away, first the men for counsel, then women like Mara, chosen for their whispers of discontent herbs brewed too strong for boyar ills. Tales of Ottoman fairness murmured over well curbs. The antechamber's anteroom, dim with beeswax tapers, became confessional, his questions probing like lancets, obsessions with communal purity, demanding confessions of hidden sins. He led her away. The door latched, the pamphlets hint at violations that twisted sustenance into subjugation, bodies claimed to cleanse the state's dross. Dawn found her returned, steps faltering, but her tongue unloosed in defiance. Better a beggar's hearth than a prince's pyre. The feast curdled, then guards piling, kindling at the doors, oil-soaked rushes igniting with a whoosh that sucked air from lungs. Flames crawled up wainscoting, smoke acrid with pitch and charring flesh. Mara, near the nave, pressed a locket her daughter's hair to her lips before the heat buckled her knees. Families with young ones were present, their suffering noted in chronicles, but spared recounting here. The blaze's systemic horror lay in its inclusivity, but Mara's adult resolve prayers rising amid crackles redirects us to her unyielding spirit. Survivors' accounts in the 1486 Saxon tales describe the aftermath. Smouldering husks hauled to the charnel pit, the air days later reeking of ash and regret. This wasn't charity's inversion, it was social engineering, Vlad's control mania targeting the indigent as vectors of unrest. Florescu's biography links it to his hostage-era scarcity, where Ottoman arms masked dominance. Curta debates its veracity, calling it propaganda staple, yet mass bone pits near Târgoviște, dated 1460 via radiocarbon, bare burn marks aligning with the tale. Society scarred, arms dried up, beggars banished to forests, fostering Hajduk bands that harried tax collectors. Echoes in modern austerity welfare reforms that starve the vulnerable to incentivize productivity. They aimed for efficiency, not equity. Ghosts who haunt policy papers, their pyres blueprints for purges yet to come. In Mara's locket, melted but intact in a 2007 museum find, the machine met its foil, memory, forged in fire, refusing extinction. On the fourth turn, the machine scaled to invasion's fever, the Ottoman host a glittering serpent uncoiling across the Danube. Summer 1462 baked the plains, sun hammering like a smith's mallet on anvils of parched clay, the air shimmering with heat mirages over Târgovichte's thatched sprawl. Mehmed II, the conqueror, camped 20 miles south, pavilions of striped silk billowing in siroccos, 10,000 tents exhaling curry and oud smoke, janissaries in green felts, drilling to kettle drums throb. Vlad spies Hajduks in Tatar garb slip through pickets, reporting harems guarded by eunuchs, concubines veiled in gauze, their laughter a siren's call in his paranoia. Betrayal loomed. Brother Radu, Ottoman, fostered, whispered favor in the Sultan's ear. Vlad mobilized, his council chamber thick with pipe smoke and the scratch of quills on vellum, plotting the night attack. June 17th, moonless black, Hajduks forded the frozen Argesh Wait. No, the Sereth, in silence, broken only by water's gurgle and horses' muffled snorts. They struck the camp at dawn's grey hem, blades flashing in torchlight, screams erupting as tents collapsed in bloody heaps. Among the captives dragged from silken litters was Aisha, 22, a Circassian odalisque gifted to Mehmed, her skin like polished walnut, eyes kohl-rimmed and wary from harem intrigues. Born to mountain tribes, she'd learned to read divans by lamplight, dreaming of black earth fields beyond Istanbul's minarets. Now, bound in a Hajduk's cloak, she pondered her child's fate in the seraglio. The return march dragged, wagons rutted in mud churned by fleeing hooves, the air heavy with the bleat of seized goats and the low sobs of women clustered like wilted poppies. At Târgovichte's outskirts, the forest rose, stakes felled in Carpathian groves, their tips charred black. Vlad's pavilion, amid the semicircle's curve, hummed with interpreters' murmurs. His obsession piqued Ottoman women as ultimate betrayal, vessels of the infidel's soft power to be penetrated and displayed. He selected 20 for the inner ring, Aisha among them, her escort's grip iron on her arm. He led her away. The canvas side closed. Chalco-Condyle's histories veils the act in euphemism, coupling with captives to mock the Sultan, but the violation's intent clear, dominance over desire's empire. Returned at noon, Aisha's veil torn, she stood tall, reciting surahs under breath, her voice a thread of salt in the wound. Unbowed, she aided others, binding gashes with sari strips, her resilience a quiet insurgency. The impalements commenced at vespers, poles groaning upright with hydraulic creaks, bodies lifted in squeals of rope and pulley. Aisha ascended last, her gaze locking on Vlad's distant figure. Allah sees the stakes master. The forest thickened 23,000, men and women, a living palisade groaning in wind. Families among them bore young, their losses etched in ledgers, but undetailed here. The horror's scale indicts the system, yet Aisha's poised prayers unbroken turns, focus to adult defiance. The Sultan, viewing from afar, wretched, his army fracturing in nightmare's wake. This apex unveiled the machine's diplomatic calculus, women's bodies as psychological ordnance, violation fueling the spectacle that repelled Mehmed. Tursun Beg's chronicle tallies the toll, while 2012 LiDAR scans map the field of thorns, stakes, shadows etched in soil. Debates swirl propaganda inflating numbers. Per Andreescu's 1,991 essays, yet the retreat's fact stands. Ottomans withdrew. Wallachia spared for a season. Legacies linger. Traumas generational bleed, like refugee crises where captive women rebuild in silence. They craved not victory, but vassalage's illusion. Ghosts whose moans mocked the Sultan's dreams. In Aisha's final surah, whispered to winds that carried it to Istanbul, the machine glimpsed its limits. Faith, unimpaled, outlives flesh. While the forest swayed in summer zephyrs, Vlad made one crucial error. He pierced the wrong veil. The fifth phase twisted inward, to the hearths of his own, where obsession with moral hygiene turned kinswomen into kindling. Late 1462, as locusts stripped the fields to stubble, leaving a harvest of husks and hollow bellies, Târgovişte's courts filled with petitions, wives accusing husbands of dalliance, boyars sniffing heresy in neighbors' beds. Vlad, ensconced in his scriptorium amid stacks of vellum scented with oak gall ink, decreed audits of virtue spies in every village, reporting unchaste glances as treason. The air chilled with All Saints' fog, braziers crackling chestnuts in market squares when the summonses went out. Noble women suspected of infidelity, their gowns of katifia silk now shrouds for judgment. One such was Elisabetta, 30, consort to a mid-level boyar. Her beauty, a quiet legend, hair like Transylvanian raven wings, skin pale as Danube pearl, hands graceful from harpsichord keys that coaxed minuets from gut strings. Wed at 18 to seal a vineyard pact, she'd borne twins now fostered in monasteries. Her days passed in oratories, embroidering altar cloths with golden threads depicting the Annunciation. She pondered their letters wax-sealed with hawthorn seals, as guards led her to the audience chamber, its frescoes of dragon-slaying saints leering in torchlight. Political undercurrents swirled, Radu's Ottoman missives hinting at coups, Matthias withholding aid unless reforms curbed excesses. Vlad, gaunt from vigils, eyed her across the table, strewn with accusation scrolls. He led her away, to the Solar's shadowed alcove, where tapestries muffled cries. The door clicked. The legends in the 1499 Nuremberg woodcut imply the ritual, violation as verdict, his purity mania demanding reclamation of tainted vessels. Returned to the hall, Elisabetta's composure cracked only in tremor, lips pressed thin, but eyes fierce, reciting proverbs. The adulteress's path leads to death, yet wisdom mocks the fool. She aided the others, sharing water from a hidden flask, her defiance a balm. The punishments followed, not swift blades, but stakes in the palace yard, driven at dawn's pink hem, the wood's sap bursting like accusations. Elisabetta ascended with him on lips, her fall a hush that rippled through the court. Young ones in noble homes were spared such intimate cruelties, though families' grief compounded. The focus here on Elisabetta's adult stand, her embroidered cloth slipped to a maid bearing a hidden cipher of resistance. This domestic purge, per the Slovak annals, targeted 20 score, their erasure to purify the bloodline. It exposed the machine's ideological core, women's chastity as state sanctity, violation a sacrament of control. Recent scholarship, like Treptow's 2000 Vlad III Dracula, questions the scale as Saxon hyperbole, yet court records tally executions. Society fractured, marriages dissolved in fear, birth rates plummeting as wombs withheld. Parallels to theocracies today, honor killings veiled as piety chill the blood. They forge not virtue, but void, ghosts whose ciphers decode in archives, unburnt. In Elisabetta's cloth, unearthed in a 1998 auction, the fracture widened, a courtier's note, plotting the betrayal that would fell the dragon. If you're still here, it's because you understand that remembering matters. What comes next is harder the machine's shudder, it's devouring more. You can stop any time, but for those continuing, let's see this through together, to the point where even monsters bleed. While Vlad was destroying Elisabetta's ciphered world, he made one crucial error. He impaled the Sultan's patience, but overlooked his brother's smile. The conspiracy brewed in shadows cast by the forest's lingering groans, where hayduks who'd buried Aisha's whispers now nursed grudges over unpaid wages and boyar widows' curses. Who were the conspirators? At the core, a cadre of 20 mid-tier boyar's men like Dan the Smith, 40-ish, with forge-calloused hands and a scar from Poenari's falls, whose sister had been among the feast's ash. Petru the scribe, bespectacled and bitter, his ledgers doctored to hide embezzlements. Vlad sniffed out, and hajduk captains like Ion the Wolf, wiry from mountain skirmishes, their loyalty bought with Ottoman gold slipped via Radu. These weren't ideologues, but pragmatists. Dan sought revenge for familial erasure, Petru security in Matthias's court, Ion the thrill of flipping the script on a voivode who'd staked his own kin for suspected treason. They met in sub-Carpathian glens, under yew boughs dripping mist, passing flasks of palinka and maps marked with red ink crosses Ottoman rendezvous points south of the Danube, where Radu's envoys waited in cypress groves, their curved scimitars glinting like promises. Motivations layered like onion skins peeled in a Târgoviște kitchen. Paranoia mirrored back. For Vlad's machine had taught them survival's calculus: betray or be betrayed. Dan's hatred stemmed from that 1,457 purge, his sister's screams echoing in his anvil strikes. Petru's from audits that exposed his skims, threatening the garrote. Ion's from the forest's horror, where he'd driven stakes through comrades mistaken for spies. Radu, the soft-voiced brother, fanned the flames from afar letters in Ottoman script, sealed with Sultan's tugra, promising titles and harems for the victors. They weren't heroes, these plotters, just men ground by the same wheel, their alliance a fragile alloy of grudge and greed. By winter 1462, as snow mantled the stakes in white shrouds, bleaching the rot to bone, the web tightened, couriers on snowshoes, smuggling missives, boyar wives survivors like Elisabetta's maid, carrying verbal chains in market baskets of wilted cabbages. The plot unfolded in fits, like a fever breaking. January 1463 saw the first feint. False reports of Hungarian raids drawing Vlad north, his hauberks clanking as he led 5,000 into blizzards that clawed faces raw. The conspirators struck then, torching granaries at Rukar, flames leaping like accusatory tongues, the glow visible from Poenari's battlements. Vlad wheeled south, rage etching his features deeper, but ambushes whittled his flanks, arrows whistling from birch thickets, felling mounts in sprays of snow. Radu's hand emerged in spring thaws, April 1463. Ottoman vanguard crossing at Giurgiu, 5,000 strong under Rum Mehmed Pasha, their banners stiff with dew as hayduks defected mid-ford, splashing to the enemy bank with cries of, "The dragon devours its tail!" Vlad countered with scorched earth, villages gutted to bare rafters, but supply lines frayed, serfs poisoning wells with nightshade under boyar orders. He aimed his cruelty at the wrong person. A soldier, no, a network, the very hayduks who'd built his legend. Now the blade's edge turning inward. Present tense grips now. December 1476, the air brittle as shattered ice over the Dâmbovița's shallows. Vlad's camp, a huddle of tattered pavilions south of Bucharest. Banners limp in defeat's exhale. He's 45, gaunt as a Lenten fast, his black beard streaked frost-white, eyes sunken from months evading Radu's patrols. The Ottomans, reinstalled with brother as puppet, press from the east, their horns braying like hounds on scent. Conspirators close the noose. Dan's men infiltrate at dusk, cloaked in hajduk leathers, their breaths fogging in the chill. Vlad sups alone, mutton cold on his trencher. When shadows coalesce, Ion the Wolf lunges first, dagger plunging low into the thigh, a wet tear muffled by wool. Vlad roars, sword half drawn, but Petru's blade enters the neck, arterial spray warm on his tunic. He staggers, vision tunneling to black, collapsing amid rushes strewn with apple cores from yesternoon. Breath rattles once, twice, then stills. They hack the head free, crude work in lantern flicker, wrapping it in oilcloth for Mehmed's courier pigeons. The aftermath devoured all. Conspirators scattered. Dan fled to Hungary, granted estates by Matthias, but poisoned at a 1,480 banquet, his body bloating in the Danube like flotsam. Petru hanged himself in a Sibiu garret, ledger noose around neck, 1465. Ion the Wolf prospered briefly under Radu, captaining border guards until a Saxon arrow felled him in 1472, his grave unmarked. Power transferred seamlessly, Radu crowned in Târgovichte's snow-muffled square, boyars kneeling in feigned obeisance, the machine rebooting with Ottoman oil. Who else died? Loyalists impaled in reprisal, 200 at once, stakes topped with heads like grotesque finials, Hajduk remnants hunted to mountain redoubts, their ballads silenced. Immediate chaos, famines from disrupted trades, plague blooming in unburied corpses, Wallachia, a chessboard of pretenders, until Stephen of Moldavia intervened in 1476, his lances scattering the board. This is what happens when the machine breaks. It devours everything the plotters in their victories pyre, the tyrant in his misstep, the land in its hunger. The system survived, of course, rebooting with Radu's milder code, but the fractures lingered, boyar feuds that birthed the 1,480 uprisings, a principality forever scarred by the dragon's thrash. In that devouring, though, glimmers emerged widows like Ilona's daughters, weaving resistance into looms, their threads the first stitches of a tapestry unimpaled. The meaning didn't surface in chronicles' dry ink, but in the earth's reluctant yield, a discovery that peeled back centuries like onion layers to reveal the tears beneath. It was June 2005, under a Snagov sky heavy with thunderheads, when archaeologist Isabella Niculescu knelt in the monastery island's loamy trench, her trowel clinking against bone. The site, a lakeside ruin where legend buried Vlad in 1477, his headless corpse, interred by monks, fearing desecration, had yielded fragments before. A signet ring etched with dragon scales, corroded spurs from equestrian graves. But this was different. Her gloved hands sifted black soil, fingers trembling as they traced femurs gnawed by pike, pelvises shattered by blunt force women's, by the wider birth canals, ages 18 to 40, their skeletons huddled in fetal curls amid ash layers. Radiocarbon dating, calibrated against tree rings from nearby oaks, pinned them to 1,460. The feast's ghosts, or kin to Mara's pyre, their teeth filed with Carpathian quartz for talismans against evil. Niculescu felt it first as vertigo, the ground tilting like a ship's deck in storm, then resolve, tears salting the dirt as she catalogued. Scapulae with stake, gouges, vertebrae pierced through, one skull cradling a locket's melted lump hair, auburn strands preserved in resin, perhaps Elizabeta's ciphered braid. The team, a dozen students in mud-spattered jeans, worked in hushed relays, screens shielding the pit from gawking pilgrims. Scientific methods layered proof. DNA sequencing in Bucharest labs matched mitochondrial markers to subcarpathian clans, isotopes tracing diets of rye and riverfish peasant women, not nobles. Osteological analysis revealed perimortem trauma, not just impalements thrust, but ligature marks on radii, suggesting bound interrogations. Pelvic fractures implying violations force, the bones cracks whispering what pamphlets veiled. What it proved? The machine's intimacy, not abstract tallies, but named erasures, these 23 souls Ilona's echo in a carved phalange, Aisha's in a turquoise bead from Ottoman silks, refusing oblivion. Why it matters bridges the Danube's span to our fractured now. This isn't about medieval mists, it's about power's perennial seduction, how obsessions with control, Vlad's purity mania, born of hostage rapes implied in his silences, morph into policy, from Abu Ghraib's hoods to Uyghur camps' sterilizations. Psychologically, it illuminates trauma's alchemy. Boy to butcher, attachment, severed birthing sadism, as Florescu posits, a cycle where the violated becomes violator. Remembering teaches vigilance against leaders who stake purity on women's bodies, their systems efficient as algorithms culling dissent. Parallels sting, number Me Too, unearthing boardroom defilements, refugee testimonies of war's intimate wars. It's not about religion, Orthodox cross, or crescent moon. It's about what power does when it tries to erase people and what happens when they refuse to disappear. The empire Mehmed built crumbled in 1922, but these bones endured, exhumed to testify. The comparison haunts. Vlad ruled 6 years, his machine claiming 40,000, yet couldn't silence 23 women with stakes and silence. Think about that, their resilience, etched in enamel, outlasting bronze cannons. They didn't live to see Radu's fall, or Stephen's crown, but they left a mark. In Niculescu's monograph, Bones of the Dragon, 2010, in museum vitrines, where schoolchildren trace fractures with fingertips. Redefine victory, Not survival, but sedimentation, layers of calcium-defying dissolution. These women weren't footnotes, they were the strata. Their discovery, a seismic shift reminding us, history isn't victor's ink, it's survivor's stone, unyielding. Elisabetta was meant to disappear. That was the plan her cipher burned, her hymn choked on ash, her body another notch on the stakes tally, fodder for ravens wheeling over Târgovichte's frost-rimed fields. Aisha too, with her suras scattered to indifferent winds. Mara, her locket a cinder in the pyre's glow. Greta, bark messages rotting in Saxon attics. Ilona, stone cross, crumbling under ivy. The machine whirred on, indifferent, its cogs lubricated by their silenced pleas. Blueprints passed to future tyrants like a forbidden grimoire. Penetrate, purify, parade. Vlad ruled for 7 years, in truth intermittent, blood-soaked, and in that span built a system that showed every future autocrat how to own not just land, but longing, not just thrones, but the tremble in a captive's throat. But they didn't disappear. They're still here. In the Snagov trenches' stubborn yield, femurs crossed like defiant staves. In the archives that refused to burn the Saxon pamphlets, yellowed but unredacted in Munich vaults, Tursun Beg's scrolls unrolling in Istanbul's Topkapı, revealing not just horror, but the women's unrecorded retorts, pieced from guards' guilty asides. In the ground, archaeologists excavated, layer by layer, turning erasure to evidence. And now they're here with you, their gazes reforged in words, pulling you from detachment's numbness, because you chose to listen, because you chose to remember, because you refused to let their silence be the final word. Nu uita, Doamne, sângele nevinovaților. Do not forget, Lord, the blood of the innocent. You're not just a reader, you're a witness. And witnesses are how the past stays alive, how Ilona's cross endures beyond the ravine, how Aisha's bead threads into today's testimonies of survival. To be a witness means bearing the weight without buckling, feeling the mud suck under your boots in that 1462 forest, the smokes bite in Mara's throat, the ropes chafe on Greta's wrists, then carrying it forward, not as burden, but beacon. These stories matter because they map the fault lines in our own machines, the algorithms that flag disloyal voices, the policies that stake women's autonomy on national purity, the obsessions that turn leaders into butchers. They connect to today in Kiev's bunkers, where captive women whisper codes like Elisabetta's, in border camps where purity patrols echo Vlad's audits, in boardrooms where number Me Too fractures expose the intimate tyrannies we normalize. We owe the past not pity, but precision, to cite their sources without sensationalism, to analyze their systems without absolution, to humanize their resistance without romance. We owe them conversation, the kind that turns solitary horror into shared vigilance, discussing over coffee how trauma forges monsters, how remembrance disarms them. If this story moved you, if it reminded you why remembering matters, leave a comment below. Tell me what struck you. Ilona's stone, perhaps? Or the machine's eerie efficiency? Share what you're thinking. Ask your questions. What obsession lurks in our leaders' silences? Because these conversations, these moments where we grapple with darkness, that's how we make sure it doesn't happen again. If you believe voices like theirs deserve to be heard, subscribe. Not for me, but for every silence that still needs to be broken, for every story still buried under propaganda's weight, for every voice that was meant to disappear, but refuses to stay gone. Vlad ruled for 7 years, built a system that showed every future tyrant how to penetrate the spirit with stakes of fear. And the blueprint never disappeared. But neither did their resistance, the cross in the wall, the sura on the wind, the cipher in the cloth. Nu uita, Doamne, sângele nevinovaților. Do not forget, Lord, the blood of the innocent. A simple declarative echoing the opening theme. They don't know yet that this is devotion, but we do, and in knowing, we honor.